Roger Goodell's office doesn't issue fines by accident. That's what made the $5,000 sanction against Cedric Johnson so telling. The late hit on SHEDEUR Sanders during Week 18 drew a flag in the moment. But what happened days later mattered more. For a league that stayed silent all season, as Sanders endured unpenalized contact and inconsistent calls, the fine became a quiet.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
But official recognition that this wasn't just football, it was mishandled. No press release, no public statement. Just a number buried in an accountability report. Yet for Sanders and the people watching closely, it was everything. This moment forced a rethinking of how Sanders' season should be measured. He wasn't just fighting through a learning curve. He was absorbing unnecessary hits under the radar. It made the wins he delivered late in the year feel even more significant. And with Cleveland's coaching situation still in flux, the idea of building stability around him, especially if a leader like Harbaugh arrives, feels more urgent than ever. The league's action didn't just punish a defender. It changed the lens on a quarterback's entire rookie year. SHEDEUR Sanders didn't just survive his rookie year, he endured it. And not in the feel-good, underdog triumphs kind of way. We're talking about a season filled with brutal hits, inconsistent officiating, and an avalanche of noise that refused to focus on what actually mattered: his performance on the field. And for most of that 2025 season, it felt like no one in the NFL was paying attention. The Cleveland Browns were a mess. Coaching instability, unclear leadership, a revolving door of strategies. Everything you don't want when you're trying to develop a young quarterback. And still, when SHEDEUR Sanders stepped onto the field, he did what he could with what he had. In the middle of all the chaos, he led the Browns to back-to-back wins. The first time they'd done that all season. You'd think that'd earn him a little credit. It didn't. Instead of praise, Sanders became a talking point. A controversy. A player more known for his name and his critics than his numbers. Every step he took was under a microscope. But not the kind of microscope used to analyze performance. It was the kind used to nitpick. He was scrutinized, second-guessed, and dismissed by people who had already made up their minds before he ever touched the ball. But something finally shifted after Week 18. Cleveland was facing the Bengals. Another late-season game in a season full of tension. And then it happened. Cedric Johnson, a Bengals defender, delivered a late hit on Sanders. This wasn't one of those borderline plays. It was obvious. The refs threw the flag immediately for roughing the passer. And for a brief moment, it felt like justice was being served in real time. But the bigger moment came later. Because days after the game, buried in the NFL's official accountability report, there it was. A $5,000 fine issued to Johnson for the hit. Quiet. No fanfare. No front-page headlines. Just a subtle, administrative note. But that fine? That was the moment. Because it wasn't just a financial penalty. It was a signal. It was the league, through its disciplinary process, finally acknowledging what fans and analysts had been saying all year, that the physical punishment Sanders took was not just part of the game. That it had crossed a line. That it had been excessive. And that someone, somewhere had been watching. This wasn't just a random fine. In the NFL, post-game discipline like this goes through layers of internal review. Film gets rewatched. Executives weigh in. The commissioner's office gives final approval. So when a fine comes down through that process, it means the league saw the hit and decided, yeah, this wasn't okay. That kind of validation matters. Especially when it comes after a season where Sanders absorbed hit after hit, often without a single flag. Where he was treated like a backup in a preseason game instead of a rookie quarterback in need of protection. And it wasn't just fans who noticed. Analysts, former players, commentators. Plenty of people were asking the same question throughout the season. Why isn't SHEDEUR getting the same calls other quarterbacks get? You could watch identical hits draw immediate penalties when it happened to a veteran QB on a winning team. But when Sanders took them, silence. No whistle. No consequence. Just more pressure, more pain, and more questions. So when a league quietly confirmed that this one crossed the line, it wasn't just about one moment. It was about the entire season. Because suddenly, people had to reevaluate everything that came before. What if those other hits had been out of bounds? What if the scrutiny Sanders faced was unfairly shaped by a lack of protection? What if the narrative wasn't that he was underperforming, but that he was playing uphill the entire time? And this all happened while the Browns were spinning in circles. The team had no head coach, no clear direction, no vision. It was instability on top of instability, and that made everything Sanders did even harder. No structure, no system, no continuity, just a rookie QB being asked to hold it all together without the pieces to succeed. Yet when he got real playing time, he didn't collapse. He didn't throw the game away. He didn't look like someone who didn't belong. He stabilized the offense. He protected the ball. He led wins. That should have been the story. But instead, it got buried under speculation and skepticism. And that's why this fine, this small, quiet, procedural fine, hit differently. Because it was proof. Proof that the hits were real. That they weren't just part of the game. That Sanders wasn't being overly sensitive or coddled or protected. He was being targeted, and not enough was done about it. The NFL didn't make a big deal out of the fine, but maybe they should have. Because their silence only emphasized what fans have felt for months. That accountability only shows up when it's too late. There was no press conference, no league memo, just a one-line mention buried in an official report. And that subtlety? That says a lot. Because it means the NFL knew. They knew it wasn't right. But they still chose to address it quietly, with as little attention as possible. Which raises a bigger issue. What about all the other hits Sanders took that weren't reviewed? What about the ones that didn't meet whatever internal threshold the league uses for enforcement? How high does that threshold have to be for a young quarterback to get real-time protection? Because that's what was missing all season. Real-time response. If the hits only draw fines after the game is over, what does that do for the player in the moment? Where's the deterrent? Where's the trust? And that's where the league has to be held accountable, not just for what they finally did, but for everything they didn't do when it mattered most. And now, with the Browns still in flux and rumors swirling about John Harbaugh possibly coming in to take over, the stakes have shifted again. Harbaugh is known for structure, for stability, for building teams around a quarterback, and developing from within. If someone like that is looking at Cleveland and not running away, that says something. That means maybe this roster isn't a lost cause. That maybe, just maybe, Sanders isn't just surviving in spite of the chaos. He might actually be the foundation. Because Harbaugh doesn't waste time on dead ends. If he sees potential in Sanders, then that alone is a major statement. It means people in the league are starting to see past the noise, past the bad takes, past the lazy assumptions. They're starting to see what fans saw all along, that Sanders was better than the situation he was put in. Now, none of this means he's suddenly being handed the keys. The Browns have decisions to make. But those decisions now have to be based on context. Not just stats, not just narratives, but the full picture, including the punishment he endured, the lack of protection he was given, and the resilience he showed anyway. This fine doesn't fix what happened, but it changes how we talk about it. It adds weight to everything fans have been saying. It turns what felt like opinion into something closer to fact. The league reviewed it. The league fined it. The league knew. And when the league knows, the conversation shifts. So the next time someone tries to dismiss Sanders as just hype or claim he didn't earn it, there's a very simple response. The NFL disagrees. And now the Browns have a choice. Do they wipe the slate clean again? Or do they take a second look and realize they might already have something real? Something worth building around. Something worth protecting. If you've been following this saga all season, now's your time. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was the fine enough? Did it come too late? And what do you think Cleveland should do next? Hit like, share this with someone who's been yelling about the bad calls all year, and make sure you're subscribed. Because this is the kind of story that doesn't end with one fine. It's just getting started. The story of SHEDEUR Sanders' rookie season isn't about stats on a spreadsheet. It's about survival in a system that seemed determined to test his limits, physically and mentally. And, until that fine dropped in the NFL's accountability report, survival was all it looked like he'd be credited for. But now, with that fine on record, $5,000 from Cedric Johnson for a late hit in Week 18, everything's changed. Not because of the amount. No one's mistaking $5,000 for a grand gesture. It's not life-changing money for a professional athlete. But symbolically, it was huge. It was the first and only time the league publicly acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, Sanders had been absorbing more than just ordinary contact. That maybe his treatment hadn't been within the bounds of standard NFL physicality. That the punishment he took on the field all year long wasn't just bad luck or poor pass protection. It was uncalled for. And it was on tape. This one decision, buried in league paperwork, did more to validate the frustrations of Browns fans and fair-minded analysts than a dozen press conferences ever could. Because it wasn't lip service. It was action. Quiet, subtle, low-key action. But action all the same. And after a full season where it felt like everyone, from game officials to the national media, had decided to pretend those hits weren't a big deal, the fine landed like a thunderclap. It said, yes, you were right to question this. Yes, we saw it too. And yes, it crossed the line. That's the kind of accountability that's been missing in the NFL when it comes to how young quarterbacks, especially ones in unstable environments, are treated. And SHEDEUR Sanders? He walked into the league with a microscope on him. Not just because of his college career. Not just because of his famous father. But because there's always that undercurrent of expectation when someone walks in with attention already on them. Everyone wants to know if it's all just noise. So when things didn't go perfectly right away, when the offense sputtered, when the Browns floundered, when Sanders didn't light up in highlight reel fashion, people were ready to pounce. But what they missed over and over again was the context, the hits, the pressure, the lack of protection, the inconsistency in how he was officiated. When Sanders got flattened by defenders, flags often stayed in the refs' pockets. When other quarterbacks took similar hits, the whistles came out fast, and people noticed. That's what made the Cedric Johnson hit such a moment. The flag came out in real time, an immediate sign that for once, the officiating crew wasn't going to look the other way. But more importantly, the league doubled down later. The fine wasn't just about that one play. It was an admission that Sanders had been right all along. And so had his supporters. The NFL doesn't just fine players casually. Post-game discipline is a layered process. Film gets reviewed. There are checks, approvals, reviews. And nothing gets finalized without someone at the highest levels. Yes, that includes Roger Goodell's office, giving it the stamp. So even though it didn't come with a press release, the fine sent a very public message in a very NFL kind of way. We're acknowledging this now, even if we didn't then. That retroactive validation is complicated. Because while it offers some satisfaction to fans who've been yelling about missed calls all year, it also raises tough questions. Why now? Why did it take until Week 18? Why weren't similar hits earlier in the season penalized or even reviewed? Why was Sanders essentially left to fend for himself, while the league's stated commitment to quarterback safety seemed to stop just short of including him? Those questions don't go away just because a fine appears on a report. In fact, they become louder. Because now we know the league was watching. We know someone was reviewing the tape. And we know someone decided that this hit, this one, finally crossed the line. So does that mean the others didn't? Or does it just mean they weren't quite bad enough to warrant action? And what exactly is that threshold? Because if Sanders had to endure nearly an entire season before someone stepped in, what does that say about how much punishment rookie QB is expected to absorb before someone in charge takes notice? Let's not forget, this wasn't happening in a vacuum. Cleveland was in full-blown dysfunction mode. No permanent head coach. No clear plan. No real offensive identity. Just a rookie quarterback trying to stay afloat while the ground crumbled underneath him. And in the middle of that, Sanders managed to put together stable performances. He led the team to wins. He took care of the ball. He didn't panic. That's not just impressive, it's uncommon. But it got buried. By bad officiating. By shaky protection. By constant coaching turnover. And by a media landscape that seemed more interested in questioning his readiness than acknowledging his grit. Until now. Because this one fine, this quiet, almost bureaucratic form of justice, has changed the way people talk about SHEDEUR Sanders. Suddenly, you can't have a conversation about his rookie year without talking about what he endured. Not just how he played, but what he played through. And that matters. It reframes the narrative from "was he good enough?" to "how did he not break under all that pressure?" And maybe that's why the rumors about John Harbaugh carry so much weight. Because if someone like Harbaugh is circling the Browns' job, someone known for valuing quarterback development, for demanding stability, for running a disciplined, aligned operation, it suggests something very different than what the headlines all season were saying. It suggests that SHEDEUR Sanders might not be a temporary fix or a rookie to replace. He might actually be the piece you build around. Harbaugh's not coming to rebuild from scratch. He's coming to win. And if he's even considering the idea that Cleveland has something worth building on, then we all need to reconsider how we've been viewing this team, and especially this quarterback. That's the ripple effect of one fine. It creates space. Space for people to reassess, to look again, to reconsider the criticism, and to realize that context matters. That performance can't be separated from environment. And that sometimes the things a player survives say more than the stats they put up. For SHEDEUR Sanders, the late hit in Week 18 and the league's reaction to it has become a turning point. Not because it magically made everything better, but because it validated what so many had been saying all season, that he was playing under different conditions, that he wasn't being given the same protections, and that the criticisms leveled against him ignored the reality of what he was actually dealing with. Now he's walking into the off-season with momentum, not from highlight reels, but from recognition. Not everyone gets that, especially not in Cleveland, and especially not when the season goes as sideways as this one did. But the fine means something. It means the narrative is no longer being controlled by surface-level takes and hot-button commentary. It means people have to acknowledge the full picture now. The late hits, the lack of calls, the leadership vacuum, the quiet resilience. And that puts pressure back on the Browns. Because now, they can't pretend Sanders didn't perform. They can't pretend the hits didn't happen. And they definitely can't pretend the league wasn't watching. So what do they do now? Bring in another quarterback and start the cycle all over again? Or do they take the hint, stabilize the structure, and invest in what they already have? That's the real decision here. Because, whatever you think about Sanders, there's no denying this. He showed up. He took the punishment. He never folded. And now, the NFL has acknowledged what he went through was real. That's the beginning of a new narrative, not just for him, but for how we evaluate players put in impossible situations. The fact that it took until the end of the season for the NFL to formally acknowledge what so many had been screaming about all year is telling. Not shocking. Just telling. Because if you've been watching SHEDEUR Sanders' rookie campaign closely, you know this wasn't some isolated hit. That Cedric Johnson late shot wasn't a rare occurrence. It was just the one that finally got flagged and fined. It was the tip of the iceberg, and everyone who's been paying attention knows how much damage already floated beneath the surface. There's something frustratingly familiar about how this all played out. A young quarterback trying to find his footing, getting hammered behind a broken offensive line while officiating crews swallow whistles. Media narratives start to form. Doubts creep in. And suddenly, the conversation isn't about his potential or growth. It's about whether he belongs. It happened over and over again this season. Week after week, Sanders got hit. The kind of hits that make you flinch on the replay. Late, low, unnecessary. And yet, the flag stayed pocketed. Or worse, the broadcasts moved on like it was normal. Business as usual. As if he was just supposed to take it. So when a league finally issued that $5,000 fine in the post-game accountability report, quietly, with no press release, no soundbite, no podium, it felt like more than just a slap on the wrist. It felt like confirmation. A retroactive, we saw it too from the highest levels. And yeah, It came late, way too late, but it still mattered. Because for once, the league's bureaucratic machinery did something other than look the other way. Even if the wheels turned slowly, they turned. And that movement forced everyone, from fans to analysts to front offices, to reassess the narrative. Because it's not just about one hit. It's about the totality of what SHEDEUR Sanders went through in his rookie season, and what that experience revealed about how the NFL operates when it comes to young quarterbacks in messy situations. Cleveland's dysfunction only made everything worse. With no head coach in place, no system of stability, and no consistent game plan, Sanders was left to navigate a storm without a compass. And in the middle of that chaos, he still managed to deliver back-to-back wins. He held the offense together when most assumed he'd fall apart. But nobody wanted to talk about that. They were too busy critiquing his pocket presence, dissecting his mechanics, questioning his decision-making, ignoring the fact that he was operating under duress that most rookie quarterbacks don't survive. And here's the thing. He didn't just survive it. He stayed calm. He protected the football. He led. Which brings us back to the fine. Because when the NFL takes the time, however quietly, to review a play, decide it violated the rules, and impose a fine, that isn't just about enforcing discipline. It's about making a statement that what happened wasn't okay, that it went beyond the accepted physicality of the game, that it crossed a line. And that statement means more when it comes after months of silence. It means that someone was watching the tape, that the complaints didn't fall entirely on deaf ears, that maybe behind closed doors, the league was aware that Sanders was getting a raw deal, but waited until the optics were clean enough to act. And that delay? That's what leaves a bad taste. Because if this late hit had happened to a more established quarterback, there's a good chance the fine would have come faster. There might have been a statement, maybe even a comment from the league office. But with Sanders, the silence was deafening. Still, even late accountability is better than none. And now that it's happened, the Browns are officially on notice. Because no more can they pretend that the hits Sanders took were just part of a learning curve. No more can they lean on the "he needs more time" excuse while doing nothing to protect him. The NFL's acknowledgement changes the stakes. It forces Cleveland to treat Sanders like a legitimate investment. And maybe that's why John Harbaugh's name carries so much weight right now. If someone like Harbaugh is looking at this situation and thinking, I can work with that, it means something. It means Sanders' season, scrappy, gritty, thankless as it was, showed enough to interest one of the league's most respected coaches. And if Harbaugh sees potential, the Browns have no excuse not to see it too. So here we are, a rookie season that was nearly drowned in dysfunction, now being re-evaluated under a new lens. One where context finally matters, where delayed justice still carries weight, and where the conversation is shifting from was he ready to how much more could he have done if the system hadn't failed him. That's the story now. And if you've stuck around to this point, you've seen every twist. Drop your thoughts below. Did the NFL wait too long? Should Cleveland lock in with Sanders moving forward? Or is this just the start of a bigger battle for how young quarterbacks get treated in this league? Hit like, share with someone who's been backing Sanders all season, and subscribe. Because this story isn't over. Not even close.